Here, Walt and Joanne. But I'm just going to give a little kind of pre-thing that you did on our website, and it says, our Arizona wildlife exists in a dramatically changing world. For example, today's population of our iconic pronghorn is shockingly low, and yet there are an umbrella species whose protection ensures the health of our entire grassland ecosystem. The general public can contribute to understanding and protecting the pronghorn, other wildlife, and their habitats. And Joanne and Walt are going to talk to us about how we're going to do that. Okay. And Joanne Oellers is a second-generation conservationist. She began as an education and outreach coordinator for the Center for Biological Diversity, engaging the public in protection of the Upper Verde River. Most recently, she's helped facilitate very successful campaigns as the chair of Save the Dells, hooray, hooray, and as the founder and primary organizer of the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance. She's enjoyed teaching biology at Yavapai College for 35 years. Okay. Thank you, Joanne, for being here. Okay. And Walt Anderson is a naturalist whose writing, photography, artwork, and teaching are his ways of interpreting the natural world. Professor of Environmental Studies at Prescott College for 27 years, he has engaged in conservation efforts locally and internationally for his entire adult life. Recently, he was honored by the international group Artists for Conservation with their highest award, quote, for artistic excellence and extraordinary contributions to the conservation cause. And we welcome Joanne and Walt. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for the generous introduction, and I'm so happy to see all of you here tonight. Joanne, excuse me, Joanne and I are quite passionate about wildlife, and I suspect many of you are too, being this is an Audubon group. Someone said one time that landscape without wildlife is mere scenery, and I think that's pretty interesting. We really need that wildlife as part of a functioning ecosystem, and that's one of the things we're going to emphasize here. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background first, and then Joanne will get into some of the nitty-gritty on how you can be involved in citizen activism. Well, as I'm sure you're well aware, the Native Americans had a close and intimate relationship with wildlife. It was an integral part of their life, and they also respected the wildlife and managed it sustainably relative to what we've been doing in the last century or two. When the Euro-Americans came across the continent, they did so rather rapidly and transformed the landscape dramatically and in ways that you can hardly imagine. We talk about a Western heritage, but not all of it was beautiful. There was a lot of destruction of wildlife and of the Native Americans, of course, and it's something that we should really acknowledge and remember that, that this occurred and take some advantage of undoing that. So native wildlife took a big hit. The wolf was persecuted for sure. Pronghorns and bison were nearly exterminated all across the country. And when ranchers moved into the grasslands, they had some pretty profound effects as well. One of the animals that they persecuted was the prairie dog. And prairie dogs are a keystone species. Their colonies support badgers and burrowing owls and ferruginous hawks and many other kinds of wildlife. And so the impacts were really dramatic when that happened. And some of these animals are quite rare today. There's a little bit, there are a few prairie dogs around, but not in the numbers that there used to be. Well, you might realize that the key element of wildlife diversity and abundance is habitat, which we refer to as functional open space. And many of us here are very involved in open space, and that's going to be part of this history. You can see the deer in there, perhaps. Right there. So, yeah, there we go. That's a pretty neat little pointer. Get that out of the way. Well, in Prescott, the presence of the nearby forests, the national forests, which are created during Teddy Roosevelt's time, they were started at that time because the forests were being so overexploited and destroyed. But the presence of the forest and what appeared to be open grasslands out there, much of it not accessible, early people in town didn't really pay too much attention to saving land undeveloped because there seemed like the recreational demand could be taken care of. So they had no clear vision of how the growth of the town was going to happen. And if open space was considered at all, it was for recreation and not for wildlife. One of the first acts by a citizen was back in 1955 when J.S. Acker died, and there you go. And J.S. Acker willed land and money for parks, music, and children. So 18 years later, the city trust, the City Acker Trust Board, moved to sell the largest parcel for development. And the public really rose up in arms. And they created a new Friends of Acker group, became a nonprofit. They had a petition drive, and they succeeded in protecting that land. We have an 80-acre park at Acker Park right now. Now, this was citizen action and democracy in action, and the people won. But it wasn't something that the city itself was proactive about. In 1985, at the state level, a Heritage Fund passed with funding that could be used for purchase of land for conservation. Arizona Nature Conservancy wanted to establish Barry Goldwater State Park in the Granite Dells. And unfortunately, a mayor squelched the whole idea. So citizens really didn't have any input into it, which is really unfortunate. Some of you are familiar with Strickland Park on Butte Creek. In 1997, that was developed as gifts from city, from private citizens, and Prescott Audubon did a lot of restoration work, and they've been involved with Strickland Park for a long time. It's a small park. It's a private-public partnership, but it's an example of where citizens again stepped up. In 1996, the Arizona Preserve Initiative was passed at the state level, and the Open Space Alliance here in town with Elizabeth Ruffner and others were very excited that maybe state lands like Glassford Hill could be acquired for open space. And this really kind of turned the focus for open space toward these state lands at that time. Unfortunately, a few years later, a lawsuit down in Phoenix scuttled it, and state lands were no longer available for open space, which is really an unfortunate thing. In 1998, the city acquired the water rights for Watson and Willow Lakes. Prior to that, the water was drained every summer for irrigation out in the valley, for agricultural irrigation. The city's rationale was primarily to support its water portfolio. Secondarily, recreation, and wildlife was probably an afterthought if it was thought about at all. Of course, we know now that Watson and Willow Lakes are extremely important for wildlife and for wildlife-based recreation. In 1999, the Peavine Trail was completed, a Rails to Trails project, but it was really done for recreation. Many people went out on those trails, you can see winding through the dells there, and thought they were in a big preserve, but in fact, most of that land was private ranches. There was about a 50-foot right-of-way on both sides of the trail, and so wildlife was not a factor at that time, although people thought that it was. And unfortunately, well, also during that time, there was a lot of development going on that was really pretty destructive. Bullwhacker and the Lowe's things, and this was not really how people wanted to see this town grow, that type of development like that. So in 2000, the citizens voted to tax themselves 1% for open space and for streets, for roads. And they expected that most of that was going to go for open space. In 2003, the mayor appointed the first Open Space Acquisition Advisory Committee, which I served on for a number of years. They were volunteers, they could only make recommendations, but they went to work and identified the values that we would be looking for open space, things like connectivity, and many other things, and size and so forth. They did a needs assessment to see how city resources should be allocated. And of course, you can see it ranked very high to acquire land for open space, for trails and so forth. And so the public was behind this for sure. In 2009, the City Council voted to accept the Open Space Master Plan that many of us worked really hard to prepare, and that was a well-done document that has been the basis of how we manage open space ever since. By voting for this, the Council agreed that at some point we should have an Open Space Commission rather than a committee, because committees can be dissolved they're at the will of a mayor, whereas a commission is at the will of the City Council and is much more a permanent type of thing. That's a recommendation that hasn't been acted on yet, But it's in the general plan, the draft of the general plan. So emphasize that if you're making comments, because we need an open space commission. They'd have a lot more power. As we were evaluating properties for acquisition, we looked at a variety of values, and you can see many of them listed here. But this is when wildlife was recognized as one of the desired values. The master plan states, large mammals in the Prescott area require movement corridors and large contiguous blocks of habitat that are rapidly diminished by development. Arizona Game and Fish Department has done generalized habitat and population mapping in the Prescott area for migration corridors and potentially significant habitat for pronghorns. So it's right there. It's right there in the plan, but not much has really been done since that time. And it's about time to do it. If you look at the background here, that area behind the pronghorns is now all filled with houses at the Granite Dells Estates. And so that herd is probably not even there anymore. And although the citizens really wanted to prioritize open space, it didn't work out that way. Some of the city councils really prioritized roads. As you probably know, you want to buy land when the land is cheap before it gets expensive, when the development occurs. So they should have front-loaded buying the open space, but instead they front-loaded roads, and open space suffered. Very little of it was purchased, in fact. And you can see here pretty dramatic differences. On the left-hand side, you can see the intention. Originally, $40.7 million was projected for open space and $34 million for roads. But look at the difference on the right-hand side there. A lot more money came in on sales tax than they anticipated, but almost all of it went for streets. And the citizens got pretty upset. They actually began to lose faith in the city council. Fortunately today, thanks to Save the Dells and others, we have a city council and a mayor who are much more responsive to the idea of open space, and we're happy about that. And that, again, is part of the power of citizen action. Well, a mayor in 2010 dissolved our committee, dissolved every committee, in fact, and that's one of the problems with committee structure as opposed to a commission. So three of us, Dan Campbell, Jim Lawrence, and I, started the Granite Dells Preservation Foundation to continue the work of that committee. And then, tragically, one of the largest ranches out here was sold to a development company called Arizona Eco Development. There really was no eco in the plan, really unfortunate. And they proposed a huge development that would have destroyed this beautiful landscape around both of our major trails. You can see here in this view, I'll see if I can point it out, but this is Elizabeth Creek that runs through here. And all of this area would have been roads and houses and resort and so forth. It would have been completely destroyed. It was really a horrible plan. And that's when Save the Dells was formed. And Joe Trudeau was one of our leaders getting that started, so I'm happy to see Joe here. And if that had happened in the Dells, ultimately we were successful in keeping it out, but many of our values would have been compromised if that part of the Dells had been developed. So Save the Dells had a lot of events. We had the largest concentration of people come out for the Yavapai College Performing Arts Center for a big event at the Granite Mountain Middle School. Out in the Dells, we had geologists with us. We had a panel, you can see. I think all of us on that panel are here tonight, so that's good to see. Wow, that's pretty neat. Sorry about that. Yeah. So anyway, we were very successful in mobilizing the public to support the purchase of open space and to improve the city council and the mayor position. So we have a much more responsive government than we did at that time. But we worked behind the scenes with these. The city gave us a seat at the table, and that was pretty unusual for the citizens to be involved. But we kept finding all the loopholes in their proposals that they weren't finding. And so that worked out for their benefit as well. And so we were able to achieve a win-win-win solution and protect that. And Save the Dells has been the most effective citizen action group in the history. And now Joanne is running the show here with the help of many of you as well. And we sure appreciate that. You can see comparison maps here on the left-hand side. The original development plan that the developer put out would have had a minimum, had minimal open space, 31% public and private open space that the public wouldn't even gotten into. But do you see those little green things in there? The open space, let's see if I can get, that's the wrong one. That would have been a little bit of open space. The stripes down here would have been open space. It's ridiculous. It's not really open space at all. And then in 2019, they compromised a little bit and increased the amount of public open space. But when we were done with the compromises that we achieved, 55% public open space that's contiguous and saved the beautiful valley there and so forth. There's still some funny little stuff, like right up in there that shouldn't be considered open space. But it was a huge win. It took 5 years of public participation and private negotiation to do it, but we did it. 474 critical acres were protected. The Grand Dells Preservation Foundation felt that the insulting no-name creek that was part of this development deserved a name, and we decided to honor Elizabeth Ruffner, so it's now called Elizabeth Creek, and that's now accepted not only by the city but also by the state and has national prominence. So she was a tireless advocate for open space conservation, historic preservation, arts and humanities, and more. And we're installing 2 signs to honor her on the Peavine and Iron King trails. Watch for that notice to come out. In 2022, the city had been negotiating for a long period of time with the Storm Ranch and succeeded in acquiring a large parcel there that really filled in a hole in that open space. Really an important acquisition. So by this time, the public was really excited about and supporting our idea of a greater Granite Dells Regional Park and Preserve. And so this was an important acquisition, and it created lots of habitat for hikers and for wildlife as well. A huge win. And look at that. Oops, wrong place. This area right in here would have been a resort, and houses all down through here. Can you imagine? And look at it now. It's a spectacular system of protected open space. And size is important. We need to have the top members of the trophic levels of the food web, the raptors, for example, the golden eagle, the bald eagle, and the peregrine falcon. And if we have those, they're also an umbrella species, like the pronghorn, that other species will have better protection. Backing up a little bit, Audubon people have been very active in surveying the lakes and other areas around here, doing the bird surveys. And this provided the kind of data that was necessary for Watson and Willow Lake important bird area to be designated. In 2011, there was a big ceremony here, and there's Carl Tomoff with a map of the area. And you can see at this time, by designating these as important bird areas, it also acknowledged the importance of wildlife, particularly those with feathers. And it showed that we can have coexistence between people and wildlife. Now, this is still something we have to keep. We have to make sure we don't kill the golden goose by having too much recreation. So there may be times and places where we have to have some zoning or some controls so that people don't destroy the wildlife populations that we all love so much. Well, birding could be a super major economic engine for the community. Earlier this spring, there was a purple gallinule slipped up here from Florida or someplace, and was a real delight. People came from all over to see that. We had a gull that came down from the Pacific Northwest, a glaucous gull. There were people out there who came all the way from San Diego to see that, because they don't go down to San Diego. So it can be a tremendous economic engine, and the Verde Valley Bird and Nature Festival, which is 4 days in the spring, shows just the potential for economic return from birding like this. The Upper Verde River IBA was also a result of data collected by Audubon members like this. I was on the science committee for the state IBAs, and we couldn't do an IBA unless there was data to support it. So all of you who have participated in that, thank you so much. And this is protected habitat for the threatened western yellow-billed cuckoo, the common blackhawk, and many, many other species. And then, of course, education and support for the Upper Verde. Gary is here. Gary Beverly, of course, has been the real champion for the Upper Verde River, for Del Rio Springs, and so forth. Joanne is over here teaching as well. She was the Verde coordinator for the Center for Biological Diversity. And part of this is building constituency for an area that many people don't know very well because there's not a lot of easy public access. It's not a place you can just drive right into and see. So anyway, a lot of support for the Upper Verde River has occurred. It's seeking status as a wild and scenic river. What's the status of that now, Gary? Oh, well, yeah, that, absolutely. So, yeah, this really does show the importance of politics for conservation. We really do have to elect people who share the values that we have and will work for conservation. And it takes that political power to get this sort of protection that we need. So remember that when you vote. Well, the Upper Verde River has tremendous wildlife riches with beavers and otters and raccoons and many, many other species, mountain lions and elk and deer and so forth. It's really wonderful. But when I first saw it, 1991 is when I came to Prescott College. When I first saw it, it was a pretty degraded landscape. It was badly overgrazed. There were very few cottonwoods, just a couple big old ones because the cattle were killing all the young ones coming up. And then when the cattle were pulled out, thanks to the Endangered Species Act and some endangered fish, it made all the difference. And the riparian areas have come back. And this is what it looks like this time of year. I'm not sure, I haven't been up there this last week, but that's a November shot, or those are November shots. And now we have the careful for, and that's one of the reasons why engagement like you're doing here tonight is so important. This occurred just within the last couple of years, right at the edge of the dells, this what they call land leveling, and it's just, or mass grading, and it's really shocking to see that. That could have happened right there in that beautiful valley in the heart of the dells, and thank heavens we didn't have that happen. Another big threat was the Sundog Connector, a 5-lane highway that would have gone across the middle of the slopes here, all the way across here. There would have been a huge highway there close to Yavapai Hills. It would have been a tremendous scar, tremendous disturbance, and a dangerous barrier to wildlife movement. And wildlife movement is really critical. And the citizens fought it, and at this point, it's been shelved. We hope that we can keep it shelved and let people get it completely out of their memories, if possible. And then there was another push to widen Highway 89 in what we call the narrows in the dells to 5 lanes. They're going to be putting some utilities through there, replacing the pipelines, sewage lines and water lines. And they, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to blast the granite and make this a 5-lane road, 2 or 4 5-lane road. No way, we don't want that. And so the city council has listened, and at this point it's tabled, but we have to be always on our toes to make sure that this doesn't ever develop, because this is really a rare entry to our city to have this narrow lane. It's just beautiful. And roads are really important when you talk about wildlife because they fragment wildlife habitat, and that's a real serious problem. So we don't need more roads, we just need better designed roads. So then this last year, Joanne started the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance, CAWA, and she's going to be talking a lot more about that because that's an opportunity for people to get engaged and collect some more data and so forth. And grasslands are poorly protected, a lot of it private or state lands, and they're vital to our aquifers and to our wildlife. And the pronghorn is the perfect umbrella species. An umbrella species, of course, is one whose protection protects many other things in the ecosystem below it. Now, there are many birds out there in the grasslands. There are raptors, of course, and there are longspurs and sprigs, pipits, a lot of really great birds out in there. But meadowlarks are sort of typical, and we have 2 species here. We have the western, and then one recently designated is the Chihuahuan meadowlark. Now, it used to be called eastern, and I liked it better then. You could see there's some differences. But when it was eastern, you could just look and see, well, that one's pointing east, that one's pointing west. It was much, much easier in those days. So what more can we do to protect wildlife? And so now I'm turning it over to Joanne, and it's her show here. Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here tonight. It's been a really interesting day of wildlife meetings, so I'm going to be excited to share some information with you beyond what I've already prepared. I did want to start out with just talking about what wildlife is, because what I've seen in my interactions with the agencies and municipalities that it seems like the smaller things get overlooked. So we want to make sure that when we talk about wildlife, we're including things like amphibians, and of course mammals, birds, insects, reptiles, and fish. And this really does expand the idea of wildlife corridors quite a bit. But yes, we can still talk about the pronghorn as being an umbrella, which could afford protection for many of these, maybe not the fish exactly, but because of the large area that pronghorns exist in and the habitats that would be included. The more we're exposed to nature's full splendor, be it through films, museums, or ecotourism, the more we might be tempted to imagine that nature is an endless and inexhaustible resource. Of course, those people in the room who get out as much as you do understand that that's not the case. We see our wildlife being exhausted all the time, whether it's roadkill or looking at the mass grading that occurs and having animals be displaced. Some action that's happening over at Prescott Lakes Parkway in the Prescott Lakes area right now has displaced many animals from the new development that's going in there. And so I'm going to ask you tonight to think about the animals when you are out and about and as you see things happening. My mantra might be something like, if you see something, say something, because we can all make a difference in what happens to the future of our wildlife. I pulled up this graphic that many of you have seen before, and it talks specifically about mammals, but it is illustrative of how humans and their domestic animals relate to the abundance of wild mammals in the world. And you can see what a disconnect there is, or what a dominance there is from the humans and their animals. And we see this as we go around, but maybe we don't realize how much of a difference it is. And so we have only about 6% of the combined weight of mammals on Earth being wild. Now we also know that there's insects and birds, and of course all those are the smaller critters that we could count in, but this is pretty dramatic to think about this. But we do have a crystal ball. If we had a chance to have looked forward to today and seen what has been happening with our pronghorn, for example, maybe we would have made decisions differently. This text here is from the Willow Creek herd plan for the pronghorn that lived in that area. And this was a report from, what's the year on this one? I can't quite, 1997, I believe, was the year on this. Yeah. And anyway, this was a herd that we lost. It was existing where the Prescott Lakes development is now. There was also a herd over by Yavapai Regional Medical Center, which was now Dignity Health. And they had public meetings, they had discussions about what to do with the herd. They knew that there would be insufficient habitat for these animals. And Walt had to remind me that there was a failed relocation, and then they were just left after that to breed unsuccessfully, and they were killed on roads, and the population just winked out. So we have an example of what could happen if nothing was done. Right? If we see these things happening in our area, other areas around the county also. So, introducing the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance, we're a volunteer alliance dedicated to maintaining wildlife populations by protecting open spaces and functional habitat and decreasing fragmentation. It sounds like a pretty big order for a group of volunteer citizens, doesn't it? Well, we do this by joining regional conversations, sharing information and collaborating. Collaboration is the really big one. And I want to share with you today that Walt and I spent part of our afternoon collaborating with the town of Prescott Valley on wildlife corridors. And we're just so happy about having been at the table with Prescott Valley. And so we have some good things happening with that. That is going to be very slow and frustrating, I'm sure, but things are breaking loose a little bit. And CAWA also hosts events, which is something that's been fun for us and good for the community. We really want public to be engaged with wildlife and spread the word. The genesis of CAWA came from actually Save the Dells. I managed the email for the Save the Dells group, and people would write to Save the Dells. Now, they also wrote to us about cell towers and what happened to the solid waste bins, all kinds of things. They'd contact Save the Dells. Can't you do something, Save the Dells? Well, so it started being more focused on wildlife. Can't you please find out what the plan is for the SR 89 Prescott Lakes Parkway underpass? Can you tell us how we can provide water for wildlife? Can you help us preserve grasslands? Can we ask that the decision makers consider the big picture? Can we have more opportunities to give feedback? Can we give wildlife the resources they need? Or help that elk, deer, pronghorn? There's an elk trying to cross the road. What can I do? Right? So we were asked, speak for the animals. Can you find the latest game and fish pronghorn management plan? Or can you help me feel less sad about the fate of our wildlife? And these are things that people wrote to Save the Dells about, which was me. And so I started feeling very inadequate, starting feeling like I just couldn't be the person who could handle all of this. So got in touch with a bunch of my friends who were associated with other groups like Prescott Audubon, Granite Dells Preservation Foundation, Great Old Broads for Wilderness, Yavapai Group Sierra Club, and we started having meetings. We chose the pronghorn as our umbrella species for the reasons that Walt outlined to you. And as large animals then requiring a lot of space, if we protect them, keep them happy, we're going to protect a lot of other things. We're already doing things right. I mean, we are. We've got certified wildlife habitat. We do backyard bird counts. We collect data on eBird. We participate in surveys. We have our cameras in our yards that we have photos of interesting animals on, and we share them. And people are amazed at what we have. We have pictures. This picture is from I guess, Ann, I would say Yavapai Hills, but maybe the ranch. This picture is from a friend of ours who had some bobcats right by the road. They had, at the time, what was called like a telephone tree, but it was like for wildlife. So they'd call their neighbor, bobcat coming, and the neighbor would call, bobcat coming, and they'd watch the bobcat walk across, kind of just right outside the state land fence. So that was pretty cool. We keep our cats indoors. This is a Facebook page from the Prescott, Arizona local wildlife, and they share all kinds of interesting things. So these are great. Very good actions. But we really need to and can speak for animals more regionally. So some of this has to do with roads. The Great Western Corridor is something that is in the conversation. This is an old report cover. It's still in general plans. We have the City of Prescott land use map here that includes different colors for different types of designations, for zoning, for open space, and housing density, and so forth. We want to see something like that connect to other areas so that wildlife can have a place to go. We dealt with the Sundog Connector project, which was partly concerning, a regional situation. It was different to be having Prescott think about Prescott Valley and then think about what's north of there and maybe how Chino Valley fits in and where's the wildlife going to go. Many of us were involved in discussions around the Sundog Connector, and some of them are here in the audience today. And one of the thoughts that we really emphasized on this is wildlife safety. It was a really, really big issue. We brought it up a lot. We saw that there were really no mentions of it in the design concept report that was produced. The estimate on the cost of the Sundog connector did not include any consideration of mitigation, which is minor, for wildlife. And the public pressure really turned the tide. So I'm going to read something to you that came from a meeting I was at this afternoon with the SIMPO group, which is the Central Yavapai Metropolitan Planning Organization, who's the really the facilitator for transportation throughout Yavapai County in a very big way. They've just expanded their boundary to go quite a bit west now. And it's funny, when Sundog Connector comes up, they kind of hunch their shoulders and they say, oh, I don't know if we want to talk about that. But what Bryn Stotler said today was that the Sundog Connector study helped SIMPO prioritize wildlife and conservation. And it made them realize how important the conservation of wildlife is to the public, and that they assimilated all of the remarks that were made. And I just loved hearing that today, because what they had, it was really gratifying, because back in, it was January, they had a strategic planning meeting. And they had a slide on there that said, regional conservation, wildlife corridors, funding for wildlife corridors. And I just could hardly believe it. And they've been kind of secretive about it, but today they really came out with that they have this nexus, they called it. They have the public interest, or what I like to call public pressure, along with money, and they're really going for making a plan. So we're going to see how that goes. And we can see here how animals need this concept of larger areas where they can migrate, especially pronghorn and deer and elk, of course. You can see by the map in the lower right-hand corner, this is a migration route of pronghorn, which are known as the south of I-40 pronghorn herd. Of course, it's a radio collar data, so you're looking at the same animals part of the time here. There's not like a complete bank of pronghorn that are sitting there. So the decision makers are coming around as far as I can tell, which is really cool. So we think that wildlife should not be an afterthought, that because of the things that we already know, costs of injuries, decrease in wildlife viewing, economic concerns, how does it contribute to our well-being as far as our income goes for our cities and towns, the human fatalities and injuries, collisions, unsafe roads, all kinds of things that if we include wildlife could come around to be helpful in many other ways too. And communities are using creative strategies. We have some examples here of a biophilia foundation in southern Arizona. We have the Buckeye Wildlife Corridor group. There's a lot of stuff happening in central Phoenix or central Arizona and southern Arizona. There's something called the White Tank Mountains Conservancy, which is really an awesome group. I just met one of the executive directors. She is really interested in talking to people in Prescott. She's a lawyer, and she's really cool. So we want to be part of the conversation to bring these initiatives to light to people locally so that we can have examples of that. We do know that transportation is a big one, as Walt mentioned, and we hear from city road planners and simple road planners why transportation matters, all of these things. We could also ask why states support wildlife corridors. So we can have transportation, but we have to be able to work with the safety of wildlife along with that. And to do that, we need to think migration. Something that I mentioned to the folks today in Prescott Valley about pronghorn that they didn't seem to know, is that the migration corridors are passed down or they're used for generations. The animals teach each other where to go, right? And so you can't just say, oh, now we're going to have houses here, you have to go over there. That doesn't happen that way. And so they were really interested in learning about that. So we did emphasize that they might need a biologist or two on their committees so they can get things right. Oh, this picture, this is also a little picture from Yavapai Hills, a little bobcat sitting there. Okay, so we want to put wildlife well-being in the decision-making process. I have a little shout out to Eric Moore here. I pulled out some headlines from the Daily Courier about what could be emphasizing wildlife or not. Well, here's Eric, the importance of giving wild birds their space. Yay. And yeah. But many of the headlines we see, we rarely see a headline like that anywhere. Yavapai Transit opens up. Highway 89 widening construction project set to get underway. Where's the wildlife? Where is it? Well, we don't normally see it. The Highway 69 project here, again, the underpass at the Prescott Lakes Parkway where the Circle Trail, goes under the road there, that apparently is not happening very well. And so that's a point that I'm going to ask my people and others to put pressure on to get something done for those animals going under there. Okay. So this is something inspiring from the author of that book, Crossings. If maybe some of you read that book. We're trying to create something unique, not just another urbanized development. If we can have an equal amount of land dedicated to outdoor recreation and wildlife, that just seems like a pretty ideal place to live, So we could think about working on that part. So we know that the diversity and well-being of wildlife contributes. We all know what that can do for us. So what we want to do is give you some examples of what can happen to become involved. You can engage and follow up. One thing that JD mentioned was to take some time to make comments on the Prescott General Plan. You have until November 21st. There were many people. If you go to the Plan Prescott site, you'll see lots and lots of comments on wildlife and other things, so you can be assured that that's mentioned. But there were some items that had not been clear in there, and so I and other members of Save the Dells and just regular citizens took a look at the wildlife section, and this was before the public comment period began, and Greg Murray, who's in the audience, made some nice long comments and submitted those early too. We spoke at the General Plan Review Committee meeting, and he said what he said, but I said things like this. You don't have wildlife in there. It said, establish and maintain connectivity between newly annexed lands, period. And I said, no, that's to provide wide and continuous corridors. And then everything you see underlined there is what got in the general plan because we made a comment. Yeah. Yeah, so we really nudged them toward that. And the one I really like is the implement a public awareness program about respecting and protecting wildlife. So this is really super good. All right. And what we're finding when we look for our information is that we're finding a lot of data that's kind of outdated, I would say. We have a lot of reports that go to about 2013, 2015, and then things seem to stop at that point. So the radio collar data, other kinds of mapping and descriptions of the animals seem to be obsolete in some ways. And I'm not saying that it's not there, but it's not really accessible to the public very well. And this is something that we'd like, the citizens can make a difference with, is asking for reports and data. Say, hey, where is it? Game and Fish, put it on your website so we can see it. Because that would maybe reassure us that there is something happening, or maybe we need to ask for some more information. Another thing you can do is navigate city, town, and region websites. This is tricky. Sometimes people just can't find stuff, but you'd be amazed if you start looking at agendas and even just the different types of commissions and committees and boards that they have. You can get involved with stuff. It's really good. You could be in a group that's listening to how corridors might be arranged, or maybe in a group listening to the solar ordinance decisions that are happening right now, things like that. And you can just get up and talk. I mean, who I was talking to, I think Brenda or Roy just before the meeting, and how easy it is for us to speak to our decision makers. Here we are. We can call people up. We can go see them. We can make a phone call. We can sit with the mayor. We can go to the call to the public and say stuff and get in the public record. It's really, really good. And I hope we could take advantage of that. We can discover and share. Here's a really wonderful wildlife conference that's coming up in Palm Springs. The Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance was at REI a couple weekends ago, sharing information. And then there's a really wonderful Pew Trust wildlife connectivity newsletter that you can subscribe to. This is in honor of my friend Sonia, who is working on this idea of sending water to local wildlife. She thinks that there's an opportunity to actually like adopt a water station or something like that. I didn't find that, but I did find this Water Hero or Wildlife Hero site that might be interesting, because I know there's always money that's needed to build things, and this is something that could be folded into plans. We do have the Central Arizona Wildlife Survey that I'm going to describe to you just in a few minutes here. We, as the Central Arizona Wildlife Alliance, wanted to get the public engaged right away and do something kind of fun and remind people that there really still are pronghorn in our area, because we were getting a lot of really mixed messages from, what people had heard. And with help from the Montana's Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and with Greg Murray's good work, with his collaboration with them, we launched our first project to collect data to understand habitat use and animal existence, maybe animal migration if we could work with the data a little bit. So we have an app that is available for free to anybody, and it's available on a handout here that I have provided that you can get. On the app, you will be generating information based on your location, number of animals spotted. There's a drop-down menu that gives you options on the basic wildlife that we see, including some birds and some smaller mammals. You can also add in animals in the comment box that are different. Then you could really record anything that you see. The app started out as being emphasizing road crossings, but now it's expanded into a lot of other things. The app generates a map, and this map then takes you to the real-time sightings. So when you get to the map, you can click on a dot, and it'll tell you what's there. So some of the information here is a little bit overlapping. For example, 2 dots next to each other might be the same animals that 2 different people have spotted 2 minutes apart from each other driving down the road, But you can have a lot of fun with that. As soon as you record your data, it will show. You can record it and then go to the link, and it'll take you right to your map. And so you can play around with that a little bit. We also shared this with Prescott Valley this morning. Okay, here's that. We have a fall outing coming up on Saturday. We're going to Glassford Hill Summit, and everyone's invited, but we ask you to register. So this says sign up here. You can't really sign up there, but you can contact me and sign up if you'd like. We're going to go to the top of Glassford Hill, talk about pronghorn and habitat and stuff like that. We hope you can find your niche. We have some of these people are our partners. We, of course, I guess we'd say we partner with city and town committees, boards, and commissions. Your neighbors, Prescott Audubon, Save the Dells, all these others. And the idea is really to have strength in numbers, to collaborate. Don't forget to say thank you. We have a wildlife crossing going in at the Willard Springs over on Interstate 40. Thanks to Arizona Game and Fish and Jeff Gagnon. And we can also say thank you for the Glassford Hill state land purchase a year ago. And now we have that nice piece of land that connects Prescott and Prescott Valley and wildlife. Hopefully we can get the wildlife from the Bradshaw Mountains over there. We don't know exactly how that's going to work. All right. And you can follow CAWA. We're using Facebook as our media site for now. We don't have a website. You can record data, you can share stories, attend meetings, organize. Organizing is really important. Way back when we were working with, looking to protect the land that AED owned, Save the Dells, we knew a lot of people had been fighting things or wanting to change things in the community, but they didn't know how to organize. They didn't know what to do. They would get up and speak at a council meeting or write a letter, but it never didn't really reverberate or get very big. And one thing that Save the Dells did is that we organized. We really got the word out. So working with groups of people that can have, in which people can have different roles really does work. Please attend meetings, share what you learned, provide feedback, host an event, and make sure you talk to your municipal leaders about what matters to you. So this is me, if you want to get in touch, and I would really like to continue the discussion and see what ideas you have about working with wildlife. Thank you very much. All right, we have 7 minutes. We have a few minutes left.
Well, actually, it's not a question, but Save the Dells, since I joined Save the Dells a long time ago, what became clear to us after a relatively short time is that we were talking to a lot of elected officials, but nobody seemed to listen. So the turn in Save the Dells, or one of the turns, was what's the answer to that? And that was to change the council, to get good find and get good people elected. So my point for this comment is, every 2 years, the advances we've made, the changes that have been made on the council are in danger. And what we really need is good people to step up. I mean, there's lots of things you can do in the community on these groups and all. But where does the decisions made? They're made at the local municipalities, county and state. And I'd say that what we really need is people to step up and run for those positions. And the critical thing in Prescott is the Prescott City Council. There's groups forming in the Prescott Valley to try to change the councils there and not be successful. So what my ask, and I think all of us from the organization would say, is either you or your friends or somebody you know, convince them or you convince yourself to step up and run for those positions. Take your turn on the city council or the board of supervisors, whatever, but take your turn, because that's where the decisions are made. And we can talk here, but the decisions are made in those council meetings. And so if you don't live in Prescott, you may know people that do live in Prescott. So encourage and nurture those people to step up. And I know from personal experience, Kathy and I, that it's not the easiest thing, but there are groups and people like Save the Dells and other groups that will support you with, guide you and help. And so my plea is to put that time in, try to find and convince good people to run for those offices. Thanks.
I was on the Open Space Alliance with Elizabeth Ruffner years ago, and she was such a powerful spokesperson for many things. But I remember one of the things she said is it's really important to comment on like the city plan, but there's no real power that really gives it. And what she said, I remember, was that you need to have ordinances. And I don't remember exactly what the difference is with that. Can you explain what it takes to make an ordinance for the city council to have to actually do that?
Well, I do know that the general plan is always described as being visionary. Sorry. right. General plan is always described as being visionary, right? One thing I can say about it is the general plan generates what's called the land use map. And so the land use map is the part of the general plan that is sort of enforceable, although it can be modified. It establishes the zoning areas within the city limits. And what we really need is for the concepts of the general plan to be put into the city land development code. And I don't know what the process for that is, but that would be ideal to have it be parallel. I know that the county is doing that. The county just approved their equivalent of the general plan for the county. And now there's a really smart young man named Matt Blake who is doing a lot of presentations on the solar issues. And his next thing is he wants to make the general plan be converted into zoning rules for the county. So that's what the city needs to do too. I don't know how it happens.
Another thing that we're working on is trying to make sure that open space is permanently protected. Because even though the open space master plan indicates that, that's the desire of the city and so forth, unless you have something permanent, a conservation easement, for example, or maybe in the charter language or something like that, we want to make sure that we get permanent protection for open space so it doesn't change. Okay. Yes, Kathy.
Kathy Rusing, Prescott City Council. I'm glad you brought up the charter. As you remember, last year we had 13 charter amendments on the ballot, thanks to the hard work of our charter committee, and 12 of those amendments passed. So it was fabulous. It updated our charter and brought it more into reflecting the values of our community. And the charter committee is going to be reactivated after the end of the year. And we've got some things that we want to work on, and one of them is to get open space protection in the charter for our open space and trails. We want to get that language in. For example, the parks, we can't, right now, if we wanted to do a park, we could for votes. But if it's protected in the charter, then if something is going to be sold, it has to go to you, the people, Prescott, for your vote.
Now, it's been a real exciting turnaround for this city when citizens were so upset about how the 1% sales tax was used or not used for open space and diverted to roads. It really, a lot of people got discouraged and they signed out, but I think the activation of Save the Dells, with the Dells being such a magnificent landscape, everybody loves it, so it really was the key thing to bring everybody together, regardless of party affiliation or anything. It's a nonpartisan thing. And so that now has given people confidence that citizens can do something, so all of us can be engaged. All right, we thank you very much. Have another cookie.
And please, don't forget to pick up the instructions for the app, the wildlife data app. And then if you want to sign up for a future newsletter, you could do that.